Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Hey. I'm Lauren Wilbert. I'm assistant professor and chair of women's gender and sexuality studies at Agnes Scott College. My pronouns are, oh, thank you. Yeah. I'm ready for WGSS, especially in times like these. So my pronouns are she, they. It's a joy to welcome you to tonight's conversation and an honor to welcome Professor Loretta Ross back to campus. Professor Ross graduated from Agnes Scott in 2007 with a degree in women's studies. A copy of her capstone research project, Just Choices, Women of Color, Reproductive Health and Human Rights, sits in McCain Library, which is just a few buildings away. Professor Ross embodies the mission of Agnes Scott to think deeply, live honorably, and engage the intellectual and social challenges of our times. She also exemplifies feminist practices, so not just highfalutin academics, but putting ideas and theories into action. She is a model of feminist leadership who we regularly teach in our classes, not in WGSS, but in public health and throughout campus, in the very classrooms where she was once a student. We're grateful for this opportunity to celebrate Professor Ross's latest book at a time when we really need it, and to collaborate with Charis Books. Many thanks to Leah Owenti, to the facilities and custodial staff who helped prepare the space for us and help ready for tonight's event. I'll now pass the mic to my friend and co-conspirator and collaborator, E.R. Anderson, Executive Director of Charis Circle, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. We know that it can be hard to motivate when we are struggling, as we are in this country, but there's no better place for you to be with a feeling downtrodden, stressed out, terrified, any of those things, and to be with us here tonight. Because I guarantee you're going to walk away from this evening with some galvanized tools, or even just a new way of thinking about our current struggles. I know that every time I listen to each of these folks on the stage, I walk away with a new way of thinking about my life, a new way of thinking about movement, a new way of thinking about this country. So you are in the right place. I am not going to list every one of their accomplishments because we want to hear from them. It will be a long night. But Loretta Ross is a MacArthur genius. So in case you didn't know, you're in the company of genius. That was going to be apparent soon, but she has done so many things that you've studied in your classes. She has founded organizations. She has talked to KKK and white supremacists and got them to change. She has created sort of the pioneering ways that we think about how we do rape crisis work, how we do solidarity work, how we do public health work in general, and particularly from a Black feminist lens. She is the founder of Sister Song, and we have her sister, Monica Simpson, here tonight. Monica Simpson is the executive director of Sister Song. If you don't know, Sister Song is the Southern-based National Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Monica is a proud Black queer feminist and graduate of Johnson C. Smith University and historical Black University. And for over 20 years, she has been organizing extensively for LGBTQ liberation, civil and human rights, and sexual and reproductive justice from a southern to global scale. She is also somebody that has been on the cover of many magazines, many lists, and most recently, she was one of Time's 100 most influential people. Now, I always remember, I know that Atlanta's a small organizing town. It's a small feminist town. So I knew that Monica and Mary had worked on various campaigns together and stuff. But I forgot that they also are in a choir together. And I think that's feminist praxis right there. Because people who sing together can do all kinds of things. And I think that's part of the model that we're going to be talking about tonight. Is that even if you have different political strategies, you have different ways of approaching a problem, if you can hang out on a Sunday afternoon, have some beverages, and sing together, a lot of stuff can get sorted. So if you don't know Mary Hooks, Mary Hooks is a 43? I was about to say, just have one. 43-year-old Black, lesbian, feminist, abolitionist, pan-Africanist mother and wife. The women of Southern ground and part of the leadership of movement for Black lives. Her people are migrants of the Great Migration, factory workers, church folks, Black women, hustlers, and addicts, dykes, studs, femmes, queens, and all people fighting for the liberation of oppressed. Yes. Hooks has been at the forefront of fights to abolish money bail, defund the police, reimagine public safety, and develop new plans. We are here to celebrate Loretta Ross's newest book. Loretta has written and edited many books, but this book is one that we've been waiting for a long time. Because people have really needed this book. Yeah. Our movement, I think, right now is in a place where if we had this book 10 years ago, we might not be where we are right now. But we're here and we're ready for this book. It is a text that we're going to be studying. We're going to be studying in class, and we're going to be studying in the streets. So I'm going to get out of the way. We're going to get right into it. We're going to dig into it. Those likes do need to be clicked on. And we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions towards the end. But without further ado, please put your hands together for Loretta.
Well, peace, everybody. How y'all feeling? Amazing. I know we're on the stage and it kind of like separates us from you. But if you all can just help us in some like vivid imagination of just like removing this line in between us, so we can create a space where we are all in conversation together tonight. Does that feel like something y'all want to do? Yeah. Are we good with that? Yeah. But that this line does not exist. We really want to create an ambiance and curate an experience together where we dig into this book, but we also allow ourselves to be open to the wisdom that Loretta has and to the organic wisdom that will inevitably come out of this conversation. So y'all all right with that? I love consent. It's so sexy, right? I'm really honored to be here, and I thought a really fun way for us to potentially start this conversation, since me and Mary were talking together, was to start by talking about like our first knowing of Loretta Ross, right? How we were introduced to her, what we heard about her, right? And so I had the honor of first meeting Loretta Ross and hearing her voice at the U.S. Social Forum in 2007. That was my first time I ever heard her speak, and it was because of my friend, Paris Hatcher, who was the homie, and she's like, you gotta go talk about this reproductive justice stuff. And I was like, I'm not gonna go listen to no white women talk. And I'm like, that's what I want. Again, I didn't know. And she was like, no, I'm serious. And so I remember going and hearing this woman, seeing this beautiful chocolate woman with these long locks and this African garb, talking about human rights and reproductive justice and intersectionality and all of these words. And I had been in movement for quite some time, and nobody was talking about those things, right? And I was just like, put me in, coach. I'm ready. And I had the opportunity a couple of years later to apply for a position at Sister Song. And so my first remembering is Loretta's voice calling me in North Carolina saying, so are you ready to come work for Sister Song? And it has been a journey that has completely changed my life. I have become a woman in this movement. I have learned so much about myself. I have healed myself in this movement. So I got to sit at her feet for many years as my executive director and learn from her. And I know that I will never be the same for that. So that's my first meeting of you. Mary, what about you?
Um, to be honest, the streets was talking.
Right.
The streets was talking. I remember being like a young, like newer in the organizing, and I remember, and I don't even, come out and said, but I remember what was said was that Loretta Ross, that she goes off, that she goes off, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm a tread lightly. I ain't gonna take nothing running from her. You know what I mean? Like I ain't gonna get it wrong. I ain't gonna come off, and be like this, and have to be on the end of that. So I was kind of more in awe from what I've seen from afar, and we've been able to be in different spaces at different times, but I think I have mostly through Suzanne Farr and many of the song elders who have, I think come from and have probably sat in the many rooms that you have, been inside of and have organized and done work together. I think have passed on a lot of what, you have been teaching and sharing for years. There was something in the book. And I was like, I remember when Suzanne Farr told me that. So it was just really beautiful to read it here come full circle. But yeah, I heard that you want no joke.
I mean, in the book, you called yourself a reformed call-out queen, right? And so before we jump into where you take us to and what you have prophetically been getting us ready for quite some time, when you bring into the book, this reformed call-out queen, can you help set us up, Loretta, as to when did that first start for you? When you think about those first moments, whether it was organizing or not, that really helped you understand this voice and this like unapologetic voice that you have.
Wow. I became a political activist in Washington, D.C. my first year at Howard University. I was 16 years old. And like every other young people, I thought I knew every damn thing I needed to know. And so I was calling people out for what we would now call not being woken up. All the time. I mean, we were so stupid. I was so stupid. I can't even realize that this riot broke out on 16th Street in Washington, D.C., and I was in a dormitory that only had 6 floors. And I was so stupid, I didn't think police gas canisters could reach the roof. Wrong. My first tear gassing incident. And we thought we could help the police with prophecy. And they couldn't be able to retaliate. But when you're coming up in political activism, particularly in the late 60s and the 70s, you kind of get this attitude that you're what we would now call the woke people and everybody else is asleep or they're not doing something right, all of this. Bettina Martinez calls it everybody's wrong but us organized. And that's the attitude that I honestly had. And it was really stupid of me to have that attitude because before I came out, I wasn't woke at all. Because I came from a Southern conservative Christian military family. Out of Texas, right? And my family heaved a sigh of relief when Dr. King got killed because he was, quote, embarrassing us. And so 2 years later, to come to Howard University and like become instantly radicalized. Well, then I went hardcore on the radicalization. And I'm really, really lucky that all those older Black women who had been doing the activism since the 40s and the 50s and knew Mary McLeod Bethune and all that, they didn't give up on insufferable me. Because I kept pissing them off, calling names. We used to have a term one might not have heard called handkerchief.
Yeah. It was just a thing of the month we said about people whose hair was fried by laid to the side. And you had to give around it to get that news. I would, right to the side. And I would do it so perfectly quiet, you would have thought they owned Elizabeth art. I mean, they were just so perfect. And so here we are. I started off with a big Angela Davis kind of afro, but then went into dreadlocks, so I look like buckwheat to them with these little naps sticking up. And my Ebonics was my first language, so AMF would drop off my lips every time I was with anybody. This is my first language. And so, just to wrap the story up, it took me a long time to realize that there's a difference between being authentic and being effective. So I took a lot of joy in showing up as my authentic, raunchy self. But it took me a lot of years to realize that authentic, raunchy self could not build coalitions with people who were turned off by that. Going to churches, you can't be dropping those MFs. You can't go around a whole lot of people as being like that. Because people only listen to people they trust.
Yeah.
And if you show up in a way that they read as disrespectful, they ain't gonna listen to anything else we've got to say. So I realized that being authentic, as I defined it, gave me my ego boost, but it didn't do anything to make me a more effective organizer. Because organizers have to be flexible enough to show up in the way people can hear, not in the way you want to present. Now, I have that by the sister song. Listen, I'm telling you, when you do organizing in the South, you're going to end up in a lot of churches, black churches. Well, you just can't show up looking any kind of way in a black church. Right? And so I remember, this might have been before you came, Monica, but I remember talking to the women and sisters on talking about how you need to wear a slip to go to church, just thinking of church, or at least wear pants. But don't be wearing some see-through dress with titties all hanging out. I'll listen to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Because you have disrespected them by how you showed up. And then Bertha said, "What's a slip?"
You still like people like talk right now.
Where was that? That was some good wisdom. Right there. Ooh. I hope y'all like drank that all the way down. It's like a good cup of tea. And I'm thinking about your once you left Howard and you started. I know you were doing doing some research, and then you eventually made your way to work for the Rape Crisis Center. And you talk about how there was an overcorrection period, or what you saw as far as having a victim-led movement, a survivor-led movement, that there was an overcorrection. Can you speak to what you meant by that? And I have a follow-up question. The DC Rape Crisis Center, in which I became its third executive director, had to define things for the first time. Had established the first ever hospital protocols for treating rape victims, the first ever police protocols for dealing with rape victims. And what we were up against is that nobody believed victims. And so we kind of started establishing our sacred trust. You will always be believed, no questions. And that was so necessary to get the victim stories validated, get them the appropriate care, not being in the waiting room of the emergency room,
What's wrong with you? You say you're right. I mean, that kind of stuff that used to go on. It's maybe still does. But we established protocols for that. But what I meant when I put it in the book is that I've grown since then, because I used to default to we always have to believe victims. And we do always have to believe victims. What I've since learned, though, is that many truths can exist in the same space. So it isn't that the victims are lying or the people they're accusing are denying. It's that what goes on in human relationships is far more complicated than victim perpetrator. Right? And so each side can have their truth. And part of our building a container for everyone is to recognize that these multiple truths must coexist with each other in order for us to provide the highest level of services to both victims and reluctantly perpetrators, because we didn't want to, I did not start off wanting to help anybody who raped a woman. I mean, that wasn't read the book. Together right there. We got it tonight, right? Like my goodness, when rapists reached out to me, I was to cuss them out. And so that was also part of that. But back to answering your question, Mary, when we promise safe space to victims, later called survivors, we overpromised because we really couldn't deliver safe space. We couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't be raped again once they left our doors. We couldn't guarantee that nothing bad would happen to them, even as we were trying to get them in. We couldn't guarantee that the hospital wouldn't mistreat them or the police wouldn't do something. So we couldn't guarantee none of that. So we were overpromising safe space. And then as that has migrated out into the larger culture, the term safe space has come to mean I don't have to put up with anything that makes me feel uncomfortable. By definition, anything discomforting must be unsafe. Because growth is uncomfortable. Okay? I mean, I wish I could, get on my bike and exercise without hurting, but it don't. And so now the claim of safe space is used more often to shut down uncomfortable conversations that actually work towards a healing process so they can actually come and feel safer. And it's like those cult-like citizens. I don't feel safe. Shut down discussion. Nothing else can take place. Blah, 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 blah. It's the closing arguments kind of. Anything looking after that. But anything you say after that will be interpreted as causing harm. Yeah. So then thanks, Grace. We got comfortable. I'm like, what about a here's a not used to be now.
I had a couple of years to be prepared about this.
But I think what I'm more curious about in the overcorrection, what then is the alchemy to right size that space, to right size the expectation, the promise, how do we get
and accountability. And I got in there too, and the accountability.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I hope people learn from my book is to not be afraid of your secrets anymore. And once you get that, and then you see that your secrets and your vulnerability are actually your superpower, I'm like, oh, yeah. Because vulnerability is strength. Bullying is not strength. That's cowardice masquerading itself as strength.
but being brave enough to admit you made a mistake and owning that mistake and correcting that mistake. It's the weak ones that can't admit they ever made a mistake because they have such a fragile ego that they imagine that they're perfect and they're not. You know? And so I love the joy of showing people how they can become more than they ever dreamed of just by owning all that you are, all the mistakes, loving the fact that you're imperfect and you're still going to do the right thing anyway. One of the other ways I put it in the book is that I want everybody to feel as good about themselves as they do when they give the cashier back money because she gave them too much change. You know, you could have walked away with that money, but you struck your integrity when you decided to give that woman that money back. But I want us to feel like that about every human interaction we have, that we're going to do the right thing, even if it doesn't personally benefit us. Don't be transactional. Which of course you see too much of right now in the White House, but that's that book I have to say. Y'all only got half the book I wanted to write. Because the first 500 pages I turned into Simon and Schuster was a diatribe against fascism and Donald Trump. Really right now, I think I might prefer to see later. I said, okay.
So we will wait anxiously. So in the book, you take us on this beautiful journey through these different experiences, and we see you, coming out in your authentic self. That you're like, that authenticity is like not allowing you to be effective. We talk about the experience that Mary just brought up about the DC Rape Crisis Center. And as we're now on our journey into like where you got to this particular theory and practice and framework that you've now birthed into the world for us, I want to bring in the story with you and Ellie at now, right? So I know there's lots of stories between you and Ellie.
Mills, the former president of NOW at the time.
Right.
I was president of Feminist Majority Foundation.
For sure. Thank you for that, for those who may not know that in the room. And there was something really powerful about the story that you chose to put in the book, where you were taking those moments of like, I want to say all these things. I want to break this thing down. Can you just bring a little bit of light to that story? I don't want to give too much of it away, but I do think that there is something so powerful in the way that you knew what the end goal was. So there was a specific strategy that I felt like you were moving in that particular scenario that I want to pull some of the pieces out of. So when we think about calling in or not being, or necessarily not calling out when we want to, doing that strategically gets us an end goal. How did it work in that particular situation for you?
Well, in 1985, I was hired now to start the Women of Color program. And I was hired by Ellie Smith. Well, actually, I was hired by Molly Yard, but I reported to Ellie Smith. And I had decided that I wanted to organize the first national conference on women of color and reproductive rights using NOW's resources. And so I met Ellie in the hall one day, and I was giving her a rundown of all that we were planning. I mean, Donna Brazil was bringing Shirley Chisholm to the meetings. I thought that was like cool, right? And then I was running down to Ellie what the topics were going to be, and I talked about abortion rights and a sexual assault, and then sterilization abuse. And Ellie just stopped and said, sterilization abuse? I had to go to 3 psychologists to get permission to get voluntarily sterilized after me and my husband didn't want any more kids. What do you mean sterilization? And that was the moment that I had to say, oh hell, am I going to blow this white woman up because she doesn't understand the reality of Black women and other women of color who were getting sterilized like it was a special, like I said, at Applebee's? Or could I understand her reality? Because I understood why a white woman who was married had to get 3 doctors to say she wasn't crazy when she wanted to be sterilized. rights. And I still needed Ellie's approval to make the conference go on. So I had to swallow my call out in because I wanted to blow her up. Because I was already like, you know, why am I blackwashing Al's reputation as the black woman here representing them to all these women of color? And yet, this is my boss who doesn't understand sterilization abuse. Oh, I wanted the conference to go on. So I walked away and came back to Ellie with all the data. Ellie saw the data. He said, oh, now I understand. Let's go have the conference. But it also taught me that because of the racial politics around reproduction in America, that two women in the same feminist organization would have dramatically different experiences.
Right. Yes.
So all around forced breeding or not breeding. Because we had gotten to the point where white women were being forcibly bred, while black and brown women were being told and forced not to breed. But if you don't have a racialized analysis about reproductive politics, you don't understand what's going on. But I had spent my first couple of years at Al trying to get those white women to understand the realities of a black woman. And it was in that conversation with Ellie, I was like, she doesn't even understand her realities as a white woman. And that's the skin she's in every day. So my project changed in that moment.
Yeah.
To, you know, I actually call myself a white girl whisperer now.
The trajectory is the message.
Understand the intersectionality between race, gender, and class that produce this Well, the point is that if you don't understand whose bodies are privileged and whose bodies are disposable, what Ken Mbembe called necropolitics, then you don't understand anything about racialized capitalism, settler colonialism, and all the big words that we have for all of these constructs that, you know, only make sense to us in these elite universities that we have trouble translating out there into the community and stuff. And that's our job, to make all of this stuff understandable and comprehensible to the women whose bodies are being used as currency. You know, and so one of the critiques I've always offered of the feminist movement is that they're so busy ignoring the women whose lives are actually on the front line. I wrote this article when Norma McCorvey died, who was the original Jane Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
She was a poor, what they call trailer park white woman from Texas who had a very spotty history, who became the case, Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Yet when she went to work at an abortion fund, because she wasn't polished and middle class, they didn't have the way of working with her. They didn't even have the way of showing her how important she was to the movement. So she ended up being seduced by the anti-abortion movement and stuff. And I said to myself, when I heard something happen, I was like, you know, if white women, middle class white women, don't know how to work with poor white women, how in the world are they going to work with any other women? Because all of them are paycheck for being poor themselves, but there's such a price they have to pay to maintain that middle class facade.
Yeah. You
know, that I don't know if we're gonna work. And we left all those poor white women out there to be organized by the fashion.
I mean, that was what year, but we're talking about like right now too, right? We think about it in a very real political moment, right? And what do you feel the disconnect is, or what do you feel like we can do? You know what I'm saying, to bridge that gap? Because I feel like that's how the other side keeps pushing forward, right? Are we missing something on our side, from messaging to strategy to framework that is allowing us, unfortunately, to lose our people. And would you say that it's the calling out culture that's actually doing it?
That's exactly what I would say. Because we're so busy practicing the politics of political purity, just the way it's that we think that our job is to make everybody perfectly aligned with a political position, or we can't work with you.
Yes.
Right? But as I say often, when many different people think many different thoughts and they move in the same direction, that's a movement. But when many different people think one thought and they move in the same direction, that's a cult. So why do you think it's sophisticated to use cult-like organizing tactics, calling yourself radically and progressive? I'm like, oh, hell no. Cults have been organized forever. There ain't nothing fresh about that. What's interesting is that you don't recognize that you're using cult-like tactics. And so we have to learn to call people in who don't agree with us, but who agree to be with us. You know, because right now, I'm spending a lot of time explaining to the progressive movement that most of the people who voted for Donald Trump are being manipulated and misled, and they don't be heard. So I'm not sure how effective it's going to be to go around vote shaming them when you're focused on them and not the actual pastures. You know, the way I love the way the Working Families Party. Shout out. Talking about block and build, their strategy. Calling in is a block and build strategy. Because the block part of it is that if we lead with our compassion and respect for diversity of opinions, the fact that the people won't know the right words or the right gender pronouns, all that stuff, but if we lead with that compassion in pulling people in, we can pull off the soft underbelly of the Trump movement. Because more people want to be nice than want to be assholes.
Yes.
Right? They're actually deeply ashamed of that. They kind of hold their nose and say, yeah, but no. We can actually speak to their real suffering in a way that they're just manipulating their fear. We can actually address that and resolve some of those fears and stuff. And so that's the block part. Pull off their people who really do care about honesty and integrity and goodness and community service. Pull them off. Weaken them, leave the actions by themselves, and then build by pulling them into the human rights movement. You know, so that they understand. Matter of fact, this whole attack on DEI, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I said, I'm not willing to abandon diversity, inclusion, and equity as a framework, but I think we need to reframe it as a human rights framework. Because everybody has the same human right. But because of your own intersectional identity, we all need something different to protect them. So, you know, like I said, every child has a human right to an education, but a blind child needs her books in Braille. And if you can show how human rights is an inclusive framework so that that white rural kid who doesn't have internet access gets the same protection as the black urban kid who doesn't have a functional library, you could address a lot of this simmering white resentment of feeling left out when you only use identity categories. As this, we could put their asses on the defensive because you know, and in fact, Trump would be hamstrung by the fact that the United States government, meaning 2/3 of the Senate, has ratified human rights treaties that he cannot undo by executive order fiat. You know, Article 6 of the Constitution says that when the Senate ratifies a treaty, it's the same as if the Senate passed a whole new law. And so, if we were able to pivot and see if we could protect all the identities and the races and the classes and the genders with this inclusive human rights framework, I think we could put their butts on the defensive and have a sturdy legal framework from which to play that block and strategy. No. Next book.
No, for sure. And I think this is why I've always valued the fact that we, 30 years ago last year, we gave honor to the 12 Black women, and Loretta Ross being one of them, that named and birthed the reproductive justice movement. It was actually intentional about reading the framework in the human rights framework, right? And when I think about the work of Sister Song and all the work that it's done since 1997, like this human rights, I did not learn about human rights until coming to Sister Song and until being introduced to the reproductive justice frame. And so I agree with you. I think that that is our winning strategy right now. My question for you, though, is there has been so much pushback in all of the global work, right? There's been so many things that we just had to grapple with within movement around local solidarity and all of that. Do you think that that's going to interrupt or slow us down in any progress from moving towards human rights? And if not, what do you feel is going to help us catalyze that in this moment? Because I think that's one thing that we've been grappling with as a movement is we know that this is the strategy. We understand how we can put it out there, but because it's such a foreign language to so many people right now, what's going to be the thing that catalyzes them?
Well, the human rights movement, like any other thing created by humanity, has a left, a right, and a center.
Right.
And so there are people who misuse the human rights framework, but they use it as a way to pry open new markets for capitalist exploitation and stuff.
Right.
So that is real as the people who give their lives fighting for human rights under dictatorship and stuff. And so it's not like it's all like, oh, you go to human rights and you got all the answers. But I do find the people who are most skeptical of human rights are the people who are least likely to have their human rights violated. Have you ever noticed that? You know? That privilege is, oh, that'll never work. I'm like, okay, so what new shiny penny are you trying to come up with?
Right.
Because the whole human rights framework, as we now understand it, was created because of the genocide of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Because some boundaries needed to be put on governments, corporations, and individuals on how they can violate people's human rights.
Right.
Because up until the UEHR was written, the Universal Declaration, there were no boundaries. So people used to do things all the time that were immoral, but they weren't illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Human rights made all that crap illegal. Okay. And so now we got a question of whether or not people will actually obey important law, but that's a separate question. Separate question.
Ooh. Yeah, I know.
Are y'all taking notes?
Yeah.
My goodness. Every class is coming, hopefully.
My goodness. I think that there's something about this question, the political climate, right? Fascism is running up. And I know when we talk about calling culture, it's one conversation that we're talking to internal movement. Hey, y'all, let's get our shit together. And then there's this other way in which you talk about it as related to our targets and our opposition.
Right.
And I'm wondering, like, how do you want us to use this, what the fascists doing, what they doing? Like, and I understanding human rights framework, you know, how we understand what you were naming around the calling piece, and like the appropriate strategic usefulness of it. I don't necessarily, I would say I'm a street fighter. You know, I like to give our opposition a smoke.
Yeah.
But I usually have asked, you know, and done the escalation, right? But I'm just like, how do we, when it comes to the way in which we gather our opposition, our fascists, I keep like, and maybe it's when you talk about like, I don't know, how you give up that thing to hate, or that desire to like put them down. And I don't know if I'm willing to give that up. Just be sure that you're down. That fire. I don't know if I'm willing to give that up, but I am curious about, you know, not the makes we talk about. Our enemy does not have a moral, a conscience. Like, how do we then bring them along? You know. So that's what I'm struggling. Like, how far are we going with the fashion?
In my book, I discuss a concept that I created called my fears of influence. And then this is the time I think that would answer your question. I think all of us sitting in this room, because you showed up at my book signing, are in the interior of the spheres of influence. I call us the 90 percenters. We're 90 percenters, not because that's our proportion in the population, but that's our high degree of unity with each other. So if I say the word patriarchy, y'all know what I mean. I don't have to break that down. If I say neoliberal capitalism, y'all know what I mean. I don't have to break that down. We're so intelligible to each other. That's what makes us 90 percenters, because we've got a high degree of unity in what's wrong with the world, and that something needs to be done about it. Our problem as 90 percenters is that we put entirely too much effort into trying to turn everybody into 100 percenters. As if we have to have perfect and total alignment in order for us to do anything. And only once we get that 100% alignment will we worry about anybody else who doesn't understand hetero patriarchy. Okay. Outside of our 90% bubble is the 75 percenters. These are people who share part of our worldview, but they're less engaged in politics like we are. Right? So for me as an abortion rights activist, for example, my 75% would be the Girl Scouts. They believe in women and girls empowerment, but they're not going to lead a troop to defend an abortion clinic. Oh, I wish they would.
All right. Can you see that? And they saw they couldn't laugh.
But for the most part, their political engagement is just showing up to them. Right, but they're not gonna, become the chair of the local Democratic committee or that kind of thing. But they're gonna be civically engaged. So we share a lot of worldview with them.
Yeah.
Outside of the 75 percenters or the 50 percenters. And I call them 50 percenters because they can go to the left or the right, depending on who they trust. Because as I said, people only listen to and believe people they trust. Right? And so the perfect examples from my experience with my mom and dad. My mother, Southern evangelical Christian, sending money to Oral Roberts and any other faith healers if she wanted to, and then asked me to pay the light bill. I felt like I was subsidizing the very people I was fighting against. Right? Dad, immigrant, uber American, military, National Rifle Association. Right? Yeah. And so they could go as easily to the right and quite frequently did on a lot of issues like abortion, gay rights, that kind of stuff. And they could go to the left because on the left side they believe in family and community service. And dad wanted as local American Legion. Yeah. Mom made us go to church just so that we could, cook food and feed the homeless on the weekends. As a matter of fact, she started the Girl Scout troop back in the 50s because black girls were excluded from the white Girl Scout troop. So to earn our badges, we had to do community work, like feeding homeless people. And so when I talked to a 50%er like my mom and dad, I would just take their values and show them how I was living them out. So for example, I told Mom when I said, Mom, you feed the hungry. And as a human rights activist, I just ask why they're hungry in the first place. I usually become your values, but in a different way. I believe in family, service, community, that kind of thing. And so to 50%, you have to go underneath their words and go after those values. And we got a lot of 50%ers in our families. So the beauty of calling in is that it doesn't focus on what people think wrong. It's focused on what people do right. And that's why I work to talk about my mother's service in feeding the hungry rather than disagree with her views on abortion. Right? And I want to build up that impulse to do good and do right. That's what calling in focuses on, not what they do. Back to your question. Outside of the 50s, there's the 25%. These would be mostly MAGA people, the ones I said are deceived and misled, right? We have so little shared worldview with them that we're not intelligible to each other. Because my definition of freedom is freedom from oppression, and their definition of freedom is freedom not to wear masks. Purchase these pieces. No, not at all. Outside of them are the fascists, the 0%ers. They know there are our opponents, and we know we're their opponents. So I'm not trying to call them fascists. I'm trying to organize their ass. But the way that's going to happen is that the 90s are going to call in the 75, and the 75 is going to call in the 50, and the 50s are going to call in the 25, because that's the levels of trust that are available. But a 90 ain't going to call in the 25, because they're not intelligible to each other.
So basically what you tell us is that,
so we have to be strategic. But we have to be strategic and also be able to do a better threat assessment, because the way we're working with our purity politics, we define the 75s, the 50s, and the 25s as our enemy. We're talking about 100% of our
so basically what you telling us is that all the GOTV work that our organization do was wrong.
I don't know what y'all did.
That's even worse, right? But no, I really think that this model of like, it is about who do you trust, and that is then who can help move those individuals. Is something that was missing from our political organizing, right? I felt like a lot of the 90%ers were already trying to speak to everybody else, and it wasn't like making sense all of the time. And so I just think that this understanding this model based on trust, right, I think is something that is going to be a gem. I know I'm taking from this experience. It's going to help us think very differently about the strategies of how we move through the different spheres of communities that we engage. But I wanted to also bring in this notion. There's a piece of your book when I was reading, and it was folded out. It was like, what kind of power do you want to have, right? And that really, like, it stuck with me because I was just like meditating on what that meant for me as the leader that I am today, the work that I want to do, what I'm trying to move, as I was sitting with that with myself. But it also made me think about this calling in frame that you have developed for us as a power building strategy, right? So would you consider it to be that? And if so, can you help us understand how moving to a calling in strategy and like structure is going to ultimately help us build power?
Well, I tell a story in my book about when I call people out for my own ego versus doing it with purpose for the community. I went to a predominantly white high school in southern Texas, San Antonio, Texas, and somehow, accidentally, no black girls ever made the cheerleading squads. And this was a decade after Brown v. Board of Education, right? Now, I know we only had a handful of black kids in the school, but still, some of them were qualified to be cheated, but you would have thought, right? Because it wasn't like the white ones were that great. It wasn't one in the competition. Anyway, and so when I saw this, I was 14 at the time, I decided that I was going to start a girls' drill team because there was a boys' drill team, and my dad had been in the military. I was raised on Army bases. I knew the ROTC manual. So I decided I was going to start a girls' drill team, but I made sure that I made all the marches and the steps with those rifle stocks so complicated that no white girl would ever get it. No little Southern Belles was going to switch there. And it wasn't until I started writing the book that I revisited that memory. And I said, damn, I was organizing for revenge. I wanted to make those people on that coaching cheerleading feel the same feeling of exclusion that every black and brown girl felt in my school. And I wanted to create something we could have that I know they couldn't qualify for. And then I realized that the whole process, I was organizing for myself and my feeling of self-righteousness and stuff, when I really should have been, okay, when I could have been organizing to get the other white girls who've been left out and all the black girls who've been left out and all that stuff. But I'm not going to beat myself up. I was 14 at the time. So this is later analysis, but it taught me the difference between organizing for your own ego and power base and organizing to actually transform the system of injustice that would make you want to organize in the first place.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, of building community power.
Amazing. So we're gonna, Mayor, I'm gonna let you ask one more question, and then we're gonna open this up to the audience for some questions to come down, because this, the stage don't exist, right? Y'all remember? Okay, good. So we're gonna ask some questions, and I know that the amazing team members at Charis and here will be moving around in the audience microphones. So Mayor, I'll let you ask this next question before we change to question and answer.
Yeah, I feel like this is such a ball. This is such good medicine. This is everything we needed in itself. And I feel, well, also holding the urgency of what time it is on the world's clock, everything that's happening. And I'm like, how do we move this shift at scale? I'm like, because I see this feels like a very intimate and deliberate way in which we need to be moving with one another, the small groups, all the ways. And I'm like, friends, Mother Earth ain't got, I'm like, she's run out of patience with us, friends. We need to get it together real quick. So I'm also curious about how you see us being able to do this, even if it's possible at scale, so that we aren't, we're already delayed in some ways, in my opinion. Well, so how can we get there?
My biggest issue is that we're not in charge of the timeline.
Yes.
Because if we were, right, all this shit would be over. I mean, if black folks could end white supremacy by ourselves, it would have been long gone.
Yeah.
We know this. So our job for the last 400 years has convinced increasing numbers of white people that they want it gone too. And we're almost there. Because if they didn't have to lie and use violence and voter suppression, all of this would be different. But the way I see it in the metaphysical sense or the universal sense is that the only thing the fascists got going for them are lies and violence. That's all they got. While we got truth, we got history, we got evidence, and we got time on our side. And I don't care, those incompetent ass white men couldn't find a vagina with a flat spot. And so my biggest concern is that by moving this way again, will we blow it with our self-cannibalization of each other? So we will never be in charge of the timeline, but we can be in charge of how we behave in the need to build power with the people that we may not like, but we definitely do need.
One more thing that we got to go to your list. We got creativity and culture. And we can talk about that later, but we are like our ability to be innovative and creative and the way that we move culture is such a gift that, again, is like my power center in terms of my leadership, but it is something that I want to add to that list because
you're absolutely right, because the way I look at it,
right, okay.
But 62% of young white voters between 18 and 29 voted for Joe Biden, right, in 2020. Right. So the way I read it is that we first got them with our cool, then we got them with our music, Now we got them at the ballot box, and that's why they're doing voter suppression around every predominantly white college in America, because the young white people aren't voting the way that they want them to vote. So we got them. You know, we got them.
We do. We do. This is amazing. We're gonna bring y'all into this conversation with us now. If you could please raise your hands so you can be seen. And we're asking for you to give us questions, good people. If you want to, engage in deep commentary, I want to encourage you to do that with your neighbor and your homie, because we want to try to get as many questions in the room as possible.
Go back first.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jamie. I have a question that is sort of like, I'm a white person. I have white family members. And about how I like. And I have been reading a lot of Black feminist writers lately and thinking about this world that we want to create after we're done feeding fascism. And I want my parents there. They're living, even though I don't like them. So I want to know, my question is kind of around, as white people, how do we take the burden off of people of color, having to tell all the rest of the white people, and get to those 75, 50%ers that are in my family and in my extended life? And how do we take that on? And also not have to feel like we have to perform correctly. Because in my experience, it has felt like I can say all the right things, but then I got too emotional. And now I'm just emotional. And I don't want to be kind of on guard, where I have to follow this script. I have to do this right thing, or I'll get called out by people who don't even know what they're calling him. It's all been mixed around. So I just want to know how to be an ambassador for people to the white people who are maybe 50% to me, but maybe 25% for y'all. Because there's and how do I do that? How do we as white people put this up here? How do we do that?
I'm gonna cut you off still. I think I'm at the yes. First of all, my experience is that for the last 7 years, I've taught a course called White Supremacy in the Age of Trump. So I've become quite adept at talking about white supremacy through love to white people. Okay? Now, so to answer your question, what I want you to talk about is the concept of appropriate whiteness, where you learn to live your white identity with such joy and love instead of anger, blaming, and fear of everybody who ain't white. Because it's a shame that the only people that know how to talk about white pride are the Baptists. Let me give you an example. Everyone in this room has probably heard about those two Black men who were racially profiled at that Starbucks, right? We're sitting there waiting on their friend in the business meeting, right? You know the story. Do you know why you know the story? Because a white woman said, I ain't gonna get arrested. Pulled out her cell phone and documented the whole thing and put it on the internet. That's appropriate whiteness. She didn't do the Karen. It was probably a Karen that called the cops in the first place. She did the anti-Karen. I'm going to be the white person that stands up against injustice, because it doesn't represent me or my race well to let this go unchallenged and unmarked. And that's in everybody except the fact. And so that's why calling in wants to speak to that impulse and not the Karen. Right. We've had 500 years of talking to Karen. Let's talk to the Charlene's. We go pull out their cell phone and say, I'm not going to let this injustice be done in my name. And I'm going to call in all the other white people who don't want injustices done in their name. And the percentage of white people is growing every day. But you can't do it by shaming them for being white, because there's a difference between white supremacy as an ideology and whiteness as an identity. All white people ain't white supremacists, and quite sadly, not all white supremacists are white. We ain't trying to make people shamed about their white identity. I want to shame them about supporting the ideology of white supremacy. And that could be everybody from Clarence Thomas. So that's what you do. And again, and by the way, I teach all this stuff online, $5 a class. Go to my website, you can find it out.
You got somebody, yes.
Awesome. Hey y'all, it's Sam. Yes, this is wonderful. This is so great. I love that this is happening first and foremost. And as soon as I saw this, y'all, it was like on Eventbrite, I remember. And I was like, I'm gonna go to this because I got some questions for these brilliant Black people who've been doing this for a really long time. And as a young organizer, I'm just running into a lot of shit. So this is something I talk to my partner about all the time. And this may step on people's toes, I don't know, but again, in the spirit of calling in, here we are. I love that we are able to shift culture towards justice, right? I love that. I don't know if y'all know about the green M&M. I don't know if y'all heard about the green M&M, but long story short,
also get his nuts in a ball because there was a green M&M or something.
No. So my understanding is the green M&M had like boots on, right? She was like feminized or whatever, and people were like, no, she should wear boots. She should wear like. And I was like, okay, well, if that makes people feel seen, that's great, But I'm like, this green M&M has on motherfucking like sneakers, and we have no abortion rights. Like, I'm really looking. And so what this leads me into is, as I'm organizing, we're having this committee. Y'all probably know about it. Charis probably reached out to y'all in June. So yes, calling all Black feminists is gonna be in New Orleans. It's gonna be lit. We hope that all of y'all are here. But anyway, so I'm trying to help organize and trying to make sure that our people can get there and things like that. And I'm running into, I want to come and everything, but like I'm afraid of chewing gum. So I can't go. I am afraid of like beds. Like these are wild like scenarios, but I'm hearing things that people, to me, I'm like, okay, I've never ever experienced that or heard that. And I'm like, well, I want to be mindful of people's like access needs and things. Sure. But I also want to like be kind and tell people you're gonna have to be just like uncomfortable, right? And how do I talk to them about like you being uncomfortable is not like necessarily bad, and you should come anyway. I hope that makes sense. I'm just like,
I'd like to maybe offer you a little perspective. Most women's rights issues are hard to organize. Yeah. And the reason being is that the most urgent issues aren't urgent to women till they're in a situation. Yeah. So if you're organizing against rape, most women don't even want to talk about it, much less organize on it until it happens to them. Right. If you're organizing around reproductive justice, most women have been in their days, well, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. What happens if this law gets passed? Even everybody paying their bills, if their housing is secure, what their children are doing, what their partners are doing. I mean, they're worried about all that other stuff. So our issues always come down 10 out of 10. Rank them out of the top 10, we're always number 10. So we have to recognize that reality, that our passion for these feminist issues is not shared by the very women we represent. Okay? And so that's why reproductive justice offers such a strong intersectional analysis, because we can talk about housing insecurity and reproductive justice, or food insecurity and reproductive justice, or economic coercion and reproductive justice. If we don't do it in that kind of intersectional way, we'll never get the attention of the very women we're trying to represent and serve. Nobody thinks about abortion generally till they need one. Right? They just don't go around every day saying, I'm gonna work on abortion rights today because I got nothing else to do but I take my landlord to go to school. It is not a real work. And so we can't judge people for not being as 90%ers like we are. We have to sophisticate our organizing to work with the 75s, the 50s, and the 25.
Yeah, right.
Change of perspective means that we're going to change our strategy and show where they are and how where they are is connected to what we care about. If you don't do it that way, you're trying to bring them to the mountaintop instead of bringing the mountaintop to them.
Yes. And if you think that you put questions around like true like logistics and stuff of conferences, I would be down to have a conversation with you about that to help y'all think about your strategies of how you frame what's happening now and why they need to be in New Orleans come June.
You know, yeah, and I also want to offer something too. I think what I'm also smelling is a little bit, what I'm also smelling is something, it's a tendency inside of the 90% that's really like, and then I think it's like the fundamentalist stuff you're talking about. It's a little bit bourgeoisie. It's a little bit like nothing's good enough unless you cross the I and dot the T. That means you aren't, really committed to doing, disability justice, or you're not doing, like, that's also in the air. And I think the homie Mo Mitchell said the left, I think the left is irritated. He's like, y'all irritated. That's just like, y'all were weird. We trying to holler at y'all. It's like, I feel like that is something. I'm like, when did we get here? When did we get here? So sometimes some of the way, and some people I think would describe it as what's that word? Entitlement, or a little bit of some of that. And I think some of it is also due to like the last 2 years, many people have struggled around what it means to rebuild human connection when everybody was like, distance, stay away, got politicized, through the TikTok, et cetera, all the reasons. And capitalism demands our isolation, and it's easy to get comfortable in isolation versus choosing to be with each other, even if it's not comfortable physically for us, or it might, you know what I mean? And so I feel like that's all in the water. But I do think that there are some principles in this piece around the values, like you were naming, that we have to, call people to like, don't you love coming and like jamming out with all these amazing people who want to change the world? We'll figure it out together, kind of like that team spirit, raw energy, might add a little bit of sugar to that.
There's a couple of people I like to quote. Tony Cade wrote, my mom, she actually wrote it when she was still Tony Cade. She said, our job is to make the revolution irresistible. And then I want to quote Leonard Senskin, who was one of my mentors when I fought the Klan. He used to say, Loretta, fighting Nazis should be fun. It's being a Nazi that sucks. And I interpreted that to me, if you're not having fun fighting for human rights and justice, you need to check yourself out whether you're doing it right. Because if you're a Debbie Downer sucking all the joy out of life, why the hell would somebody want to work with you? Because they don't need any help feeling worse about themselves.
It's gonna be our last question because I know lots of y'all are gonna meet Loretta and Bobby and get your books on.
First of all, I just want to say thank you because you all are truly speaking to my soul. When you spoke about the thread assessment and the 90% are speaking to the 75%ers and so on and so forth, I just spent a meeting a day, 2 or 3 days ago, wrestling with the 90%ers, to your point, Mary, of how to get us all not necessarily on the same page, but not over intellectualizing each other to the point where we can't even get to the 75%. Right. So what are some of the practical steps that we can take in these meetings, in these spaces where people are excited about the work, I guess, and really began to pass it down the thread. Because, I mean, when I say this is so on point, I walk out of me just so frustrated because, yes, we all are moving towards, I think, the common goal, but we spend so much time in the words, we couldn't even get to the words.
Well, I tend to say that when it comes to threat assessments, we have outright enemies, opponents, if I want to be nice, the zeros. But most of the other people, the 50s, the 75, and the 90s, your 90 percenters are going to be what you're generally going to call your proven allies. Because you're intelligible, you're right and guy people. They're your 90 percenters. Your 75 percenters are probably going to be your problematic allies, right? Because they won't be the troop to the abortion clinic like I want them to, but they will defend girls' rights, right? That kind of thing. And the 50% are going to be your potential allies, right? Because that 50% might put up a Black Lives Matter sign at the same time they say they're pro-life, right? And one thing you can know about anybody who puts up a Black Lives Matter sign, whether they're white, brown, gray, or orange, they ain't in the Ku Klux Klan. Ain't nobody in the Klan ever put up a rainbow flag. Any of that crap that makes them so easily recognizable as zeros, right? And so our job is to sophisticate our analysis and organizing strategy to work with the 90s, the 75s, and the 50s. And if you really work on it, you could even pull in the 25. It requires a little training, a little expertise. But you know what it most requires? Being motivated by anger. Because when you're angry at people, you tend to disrespect them. And people can smell disrespect and not listen to a damn thing you've got to say. And so you have to call yourself in. Because if you're still bleeding from your soul wounds, you're going to bleed all over anybody you touch. And so you got to do your own healing. Practically, you've got to learn to put yourself on pause when you talk to a 75 or a 50 or a 25. Because that first answer that comes out of your mouth is going to be causing trauma. It's that pause that gives you the chance for that second answer to come out, which is based on your integrity, your empathy, and your intelligence. But there are ways to work with damn near everybody, but I do want to organize against the zeros.
Yeah. 1 minute, speakers. Mary, why should people read this book? In 10 seconds.
Use your mind.
I have witnessed what not having this book and not having these skills, what it has done to us as a movement, what it has done to, our ability to get the spheres of influence, what it has done to people's hearts.
Yeah.
How it's like, it has broken us.
Yeah.
It has broken us. And I believe that we can do something different. And I believe transformation is what we want. That's right. The way to go about it.
I feel like y'all should read this book for a lot of reasons. But one, I truly believe that if we're in this room at this moment, if we're in this time that we chose to be here, meaning that we came to this moment knowing that there's something that we have within us to contribute to it, and that we have an answer to how we get to the liberation that we want. I truly believe that. And I believe that this type of frame, that this calling in culture provides, that Loretta has so eloquently laid out through her own personal lived experiences, right, is the thing, but it's going to help us unlock those things in us that will allow us to be able to move with more power and to move with more synergy and to move with more unity to be able to get to that goal. So I think this book is an unlocking agent for us. And that's why I think that you should read it. So Loretta, I'm going to give you the last 10 seconds. What do you want people to get from this book?
That everything you need to know about calling in is already inside of you. Because the same way you effortlessly respond in face of a natural disaster, you don't ask what race people are, what their politics are, what they thought last when they go to church. You just go to hell. That's the human spirit that many of us share. I just want us to act like that for man-made disasters too.
All right.
And we all have a bit of confidence.
Thank you.